Right, well, I'm not sure whether we are, I think we're back now. Yes, I believe we are back now. It's 11:30, and I think we're ready to start again. I hope you enjoyed the first session, and we got through quite a lot of content, which is good. And I hope certainly if you gave me some questions that I managed to get to answering those questions. So I will certainly keep my eye on what's going on with the questions as they come in. We've got lots and lots of questions which I know that I haven't tackled, so I will try and pick them up as we go to them throughout the rest of the afternoon. Right, our next session is all about innovation in delivery, and we've got a number of quick presentations followed again by some questions from the floor and some questions from me. So let's start getting a view from Transport for Buckinghamshire and the team led by Dave Stewart, Network Delivery Manager. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
Dave is also going to be joined by Keith Carpenter, Technical Director. Dave, over to you to underline the opportunities you see for turning data into intelligence with the aim of delivering better transport solutions where they're needed. Dave.
Certainly. Morning all, and thanks for the invitation to speak. Dave Stewart, Construction Manager for Ringway Jacobs in Buckinghamshire and lead for our National Road AI Development Project in conjunction with Vasala, who is one of our service providers. In late 2019, we set out plans for all of our clients nationally to become involved in a pretty fast-moving development to determine real-time road condition using artificial intelligence. It interprets data collected using a standard mobile phone, which is mounted in any vehicle, and it travels at normal speeds on the network. So effectively, any vehicle we want to mount a phone in can be used for data collection. This potentially can provide the future model for highway maintenance, we think, and for future data use across authorities. Efficiency gains, cost savings, service improvements are all in the mix here. How are we going to do that? Well, more efficient data collection and management. We use non-specialist tools, we use non-specialist personnel, and it provides data that's usable, consistent, accurate, and auditable, and importantly, current. Minimal collection costs, though limited basically only to the vehicle resources we've got available. We have open live time reporting, and we can determine work programs from live data rather than historical data. And we remove subjectivity from the network through use of inspectors and going to computer models instead. What you see on the screen there is the process at work. That would normally run as a video, smooth video. I think buffering has got it as a series of stills, is probably what you're seeing. Everything you're seeing there is automatic. There's no human involvement at all. The computer is undertaking pretty much thousands of calculations each second. It's determining the condition of all the assets it recognizes on the network. All those colored marks you see on the carriageway there are the computer recognizing and determining severity of different types of defects, so potholes, cracking, rutting, etc., etc. It's picking them all up and it's determining severity as well. Features such as cars and pedestrians, you'll notice, are fully anonymized, so we stay within data protection protocols, etc. Important. The computer learns to interpret these features into defect and condition data. Every time the vehicle travels along the road, it does that. So it can identify change, and it can identify trends, and it can identify deterioration trending, which is very important for us. The scope of use, to be honest, is extraordinary. It's got me excited, and very few things do normally. The initial aim is to replicate and advance what we call CVI, course visual inspection data. That's what we use as the basis for our technical information on carriageway condition and deterioration, especially on local roads at the minute. And it informs our programs of preventative maintenance. Collection at the minute before this is slow. It's manual. It means intervention can occur many months, possibly even years after we identify deterioration in the first instance. What Road AI does is it makes that process real time, and it enables us to take decisions today using data collected today in order to inform our maintenance programs. That's a phenomenal step forward, and it's something that's got us really excited. Ringway Jacobs have determined a host of other uses, some of which I'll just fly through. So sign surveys, the system can identify consistency of signing. So if we're doing safety route strategies and we haven't got a consistency, the system will tell us where those inconsistencies are. Drainage prioritization, it will highlight standing water. It will recognize repeat standing water on repeat survey, and it'll highlight that to us so we can do something about it immediately. The holy grail is really the auto classification of individual defects, if we can get to a position where the computer can prompt us for our priority defect repairs rather than a human having to interpret the subjective area, then that's a massive step forward. It's not there yet. We have a little challenge in convincing the courts to rely on a computer rather than a human intervention, but we're as close as we've ever been, and that's quite exciting to us. I could go on forever about the things that this thing can do, but I'll stop there because I know I've got 5 minutes and no more.
Well, Dave, just before you disappear, I mean, you're currently using this approach for collecting carriageway condition and inventory data. I mean, what future uses do you see for the technology?
It's, oops, sorry, paper's fallen over. It's almost limitless, depending what one used for it. We've always had a lot of data as highway authorities. The difficulty has always been interpreting it intelligently and using it efficiently. Now that we've got a computer to do the hard work for us, to do all the analysis, that creates space for the personnel, so we can concentrate on solution delivery, we can concentrate on customer service. So we can use the data that the computer is giving us and the intelligence that the computer is giving us to actually concentrate on putting solutions on the network. So across all of our range of assets, there is probably a use for this data in every single instance. I'll just to throw some other ones in there. Lining surveys, traditionally expensive. The computer can do that for us. Street lighting scouting, traditionally very, very monotonous and manually done. The computer can do that for us. Asset value trending. We can determine the value of our asset. We can learn whether the asset is depreciating or increasing. All of these things are opened up by the use of this data intelligence.
And what about making it available to the public? Is that something you're considering?
Potentially. There's no reason why it can't be. It's held in the cloud. The data is held in the cloud. The data is accessible through a web-based platform. So it could be made available to the public. I sometimes get slightly cautious about doing such things. So like anything, if we make data available to the public, we'd have to explain what that data is and what they're actually looking at and how it is used and how we can express the limitations of what we can do each year, budget-wise, et cetera, et cetera. But potentially, yes, we could use this to really emphasize our education to the public about what we do and how we do it and what the priorities might be.
Presumably it means the end of highway inspectors as a career.
No. It means that we can probably use our highway inspectors differently. So we'll remove them from the hazardous activity of being out in a live traffic environment. We'll remove them from the monotonous, repetitive data interpretation activity, but they will still be the people who will have to actually make decisions about what we do and when we do it, and they'll have to communicate that to people so they can have much more time to react to customer concerns, they can have much more time to communicate with stakeholders, they can have much more time to do valuable things rather than monotonous data interpretation.
And obviously it does look like a very powerful system, but and you've told us about what it can do. Anything it can't do? Anything you've been struggling for it to actually identify? Any asset types or any kind of condition types which you're really struggling with at the moment?
Well, we've only been using it for 9-10 months at the minute, so we're still learning as we go. But it's camera based, so it can only see what we can see. It can't, for example, look at underground pipework. It can't very well determine blocked gullies. It can't search around in the verge for manhole covers and things like that. So it will have its limitations, but as far as visual is concerned, the way the technology is now, the computer can pretty much identify anything that the human eye can identify, maybe not quite in so much detail. So there'll still be a requirement for inspectors to go and verify certain aspects that the computer picks up.
Well, look, Dave, stay with us because I'm going to come back to you in a few moments' time to talk about, I suppose, innovation and getting innovation into the sector more generally. But thanks very much for sharing that fantastic system. And I imagine that you will be available to answer further questions after the conference with anyone who wants to hear a bit more about what you've got going on there.
I'll stick around for a while.
I'm going to move rapidly on. Dave, don't say stay with us for this next session. Got another couple of speakers lined up, and Hannah. If you just joined us, and also Hannah, give us a wave. And Ed Godsiffe also is joining us from Skanska's Sustainability Manager. Hannah Probert, you are a carbon consultant with WSP. Hannah, you're going to look at achieving carbon neutrality. We've heard a lot this morning already about the challenge of achieving net zero in terms of emissions, but I think you're going to talk to us a bit more about actually looking at carbon neutrality actually in the delivery of projects. So Hannah. floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Before I go into it, I just wanted to be clear on what carbon neutrality is. I'm sure most of you are aware, but essentially it's achieved by balancing carbon emissions with carbon removal, or simply eliminating carbon emissions altogether. And also, just to confirm, I use carbon as a shorthand for carbon dioxide emissions specifically, and it's sometimes used as the shorthand for greenhouse gas emissions, as it's the most predominant greenhouse gas emission. The majority of local authorities within England's economic heartland have declared a climate emergency, which is great to see, and they've introduced targets to achieve carbon neutrality, with the most common target being to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. So with targets like this in place, local authorities need to monitor emissions within their area to understand the progress that's being made. And there's a couple of publicly available sources to access annual emissions data, with the main source being from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Here, total emissions for local authorities within the UK are reported per industry sector. So the transport emissions are then split down further by road and rail type, and this data is annually released up until our current year. Another source for local authority emissions data is via a tool called SCATA, which stands for Setting City Area Targets and Trajectories for Emissions Reduction. SCATA makes use of the BEIS data, and as it says in the title, SCATA enables high-level forecast of emissions to be calculated up to 2050, and using this tool, measures to reduce emissions can be identified. The methodology behind these emission sources uses traffic data, including kilometres travelled, fleet composition data, fuel consumption and associated emission factors, which is great to use to make a high-level estimate of annual emissions, and then forecast emissions based on this data. However, this data doesn't enable local authorities to analyse where very specific hotspots arise, for example, the time of day where emissions are highest, or on certain types of road. This type of information is required to ensure that emission reduction measures are introduced in areas where the biggest reductions can be achieved and at the earliest opportunity. And so to analyse emissions by local authority in more detail, a bottom-up calculation methodology is required, which considers a wide variety of variables, including changes in population, emissions by time of day, changes in vehicle composition, and potential increases in flexible working, which is very relevant. In conclusion, it's really encouraging to see that England's economic heartland has undertaken this type of carbon assessment in their Pathways to Decarbonisation technical report, which supports the transport strategy. And this assessment used the NISMOD transport model, which is the National Infrastructure Systems model. So using this, England's economic heartland can make very specific forecasts, which can then inform more meaningful transport strategy measures to achieve carbon reductions within their set timeframes. Yeah, sorry.
Hannah, just to, before I hand it, I hear a perspective from Ed. I mean, one of the things we hear a lot about when it comes to driving lower carbon, increased sustainability, is the need for clients to drive the process. I mean, to what extent is England's economic heartland really kind of like moving the dial in terms of what you really want to see changing in terms of the way that carbon is reduced?
Yeah, well, I think that to be honest, England's economic heartland is making significant progress by the fact that, like I said, most of them have declared a climate emergency and have set these quite ambitious targets of achieving carbon neutrality beyond the 2050 target for the UK. And they've got quite ambitious transport strategies in place to enable these reductions to be made earlier than the 2050 target.
Okay, I've got a question from Alex Popperton. You know, what would you say are the worst culprits when it comes to emissions in terms of transport?
Well, probably the road networks, far worse than rail, coaches and buses, purely down to the number of vehicles that are on them and the speeds that they're travelling at.
Okay, so as a consultant, you'd back the MP's Greg Smith's comments this morning about the expressway, the lack of need for it.
Right. Well, yeah, limiting the number of new road developments would be a good way to start. Yeah.
That sounds well. That sounds like you heard it here first. Hannah, thanks very much. I'm going to come back with a few more general points about the innovations in the sector. But first, before that, let me introduce Ed Godsiffe. Ed is Skanska's sustainability manager, and I suppose taking on from where you are, Hannah, in terms of the impacts in design. Ed, talk to us about how we can actually achieve carbon reductions during construction. Ed.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I was going to touch on a couple of points for the contractor side of things, or the construction side of things. The infrastructure carbon review set out how to reduce carbon and cost during construction activities and development, and that was around build nothing, build less, build clever, and build efficiently. And obviously, when it comes to construction, the last two of these are really the focus area. The challenge is obviously a lot of infrastructure development uses concrete, steel, asphalt, which are quite carbon intense materials. And where we're seeing innovations come into the industry now is around low carbon versions of those. So we've got things like SEM-free, which is a concrete product with 80% less carbon in it. But what we tend to do is trial it on a small section of one project, learn something from it, positive or otherwise, and then move on and trial something again slightly different on another project. What we're working really hard to do within the industry is to collaborate better and bring all of these things together so that they become business as usual. So we're starting to see a shift towards, for example, low temperature asphalt, which has significant carbon savings as being cost neutral. We're also seeing things like the 50% recycled content trial on the M25 recently, which when you think about those in the context of the UK's road network, we've got some really exciting opportunities there. And taking a circular economy approach, we're starting to sort of, I suppose, bring those concepts into how we operate and produce low carbon recycled products locally. But where we need a bit better collaboration perhaps is where we've got the construction industry, we've got house builders alongside us, we've got small SMEs, we've got the supply chain, and we all we need to start to work together to recycle those materials into different uses, not just within the same sector that they've been recycled in. And whole life carbon and cost as a concept, as an approach, is seeing some real benefits as well. We've seen the first use of graphene asphalt last year in Oxford as an example, which, yes, it costs more up front, but over a 20-year lifespan, it's predicted to save 70% carbon and cost savings as well. And that sort of approach, when we're talking about the whole life of an asset, will bring some significant savings. Another area of innovation for the construction industry is around digital tools. So we see things like 6D BIM with cost, carbon, and program built into the models, which allow really cool value engineering around carbon to be undertaken. And that's been really successful in some of the major projects like HS2, for example, but also things like drones, digital survey tools. We're starting to see now complete digital twin sites being created that allow particularly the complex lifting movements or structures to be practiced, and when you get to site, you're therefore delivering it very efficiently and safely, which obviously has cost and carbon implications as well. And then when we get to site, some of the things that are starting to come through, which are quite exciting, are around electric plant and vehicles. They're in their infancy, but they don't always work in every situation, but we are seeing some of those being developed, and we're seeing over in Europe, for example, complete electric sites, which are saving huge amounts of carbon, 98% in one example that I've seen. We've seen autonomous vehicles being used on the A14, and that will start to become mainstream. We need to find the right use for these things, obviously. But we also have stopgap solutions. So where where suitable examples don't exist, we have things like HVO diesel, which is a renewable diesel product, which will work within existing plant machinery and fleet, and it saves 90%, 95% carbon. So, and that's there currently. And if we work as an industry and start to use this more, we can reduce the cost of that. And the red diesel subsidy obviously disappears in 18 months' time. We're seeing zero carbon compounds. They've been cost effective in a lot of situations now for about 2 years. They will be the cheapest option. So they should be the go-to way of setting up a project. And finally, I just want to touch on what's coming down the line in the Environment Bill next year around biodiversity net gain. And not only can we make use, or we need to sort of fully embrace those concepts, and it would be mandatory for a lot of developments, we can deliver positive outcomes for the natural environment, for local communities, road transport users, but also producing better quality habitats. We can start to use those in terms of carbon sequestration as well, so delivering multiple benefits for the same outcome.
Okay, Ed, I mean, really great opportunities, but I suppose the reality is this sector is incredibly entrenched in its ways in terms of using the same materials, using the same approaches, and using the same, I suppose, techniques. I mean, yes, certainly connected autonomous plant is very much a reality as far as the Highways England's concerned, and a lot of the industry infrastructure carbon review has been a driver for changing behaviour across the industry. As you mentioned, BIM, digital twins. There are always some very early adopters, and there is a small number of businesses which leaves a very, very long tail that really isn't very engaged. How do we get that long tail engaged?
I think there's well, so it'll be a bit of push and pull. I think some of these things will come through policy change. So, like I said, that things like the change in tax regimes around red diesel will prompt quite a big shift towards bits of kit and vehicles that perhaps were seen as too expensive or not quite suitable for the activities we do. So there'll be some actions like that which will happen. I think the rest of it is around collaboration. I think there's a big role for strong leadership from clients, local authorities, Highways England, and working with the major contractors to bring the rest of the supply chain with us. And I think I'm often surprised by how knowledgeable and engaged the smaller companies are. They might not have the opportunities to invest in the latest vehicles and all the rest of it, but their knowledge and understanding and their willingness to engage in terms of carbon reductions is definitely there.
But Dave, it takes quite a lot of energy and a lot of resource and a lot of money to invest in sort of systems that you described earlier, Dave. I mean, it's not accessible to many, is it?
It does, but I think if we have an innovation that's worthwhile pursuing, such as the one that I've been talking about today, then it's well worth certainly investing in seeing how far we can make that go. I mean, so one of the things that we're talking about, the environmental areas at the minute, one of the things that I've been talking about, as well as the cost saving, the environmental benefit from intervening at the right time with the right solution in the highway maintenance sector is quite phenomenal when we consider that a conventional surfacing scheme, how many tons of material gets removed from the road when we do a conventional surfacing scheme. If we can turn one of those conventional surfacing schemes into a surface treatment scheme, basically an overlay, a thin surface on the top, we're saving a phenomenal amount of carbon emissions just through doing that one. We do 50 or 60 conventional schemes a year.
Okay. Ed, just before I move on to our Matthew, our next speaker, do you see, as a question here from Ken Hutt, do you see the sharing of trial data between contractors improving to speed up the approval of innovative solutions, becoming business as usual?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely key, because we perhaps traditionally have worked in silos. So we'll trial a product, and everyone else will trial a product, and we don't learn from it, because you learn from the failures as much as successes. And it's about using products in the right situations. And I think we can definitely get better at that. And I think that there's a massive opportunity, because I mentioned SEM-free earlier. It pops up on every award that I see that someone submitted a use of SEM-free, and it will win an award. But so we know these products work, and if we could share the trial data across all those different uses, we could start from a point where we can overcome the reticence to look differently at specifications and standards, and sort of see where the risk sits and things like that. So I think there is a big opportunity for that, and I think it needs broader collaboration around the low carbon agenda, and particularly with the new products that are coming through from the suppliers, definitely.
Okay, thanks very much, Ed. Come back with some more questions, more general questions about innovation in a moment. Let me next introduce our next speaker. I'm hoping that Matthew Dashambard, a client director with Atkins, is here. He's not on the. You are here.
Yes,
You are.
I'm the only speaker. I'm the poor relation without a fully functioning webcam. But I would caveat that to say, after 6 months working from home, you aren't missing very much by not being able to see me, to be fair.
Well, Matthew, sorry, apologies. I made a complete mess of your surname. You give it a go.
No, that's fine.
Dashambo. You tell me. I can't.
Darshimbo. That's it. That's close enough. Darshimbo. That's perfect.
Darshimbo. Matthew, Client Director with Atkins, and you're going to outline a partnership approach to the Heartland's connectivity studies. So we can't see you, but we can hear you, Matt.
Fantastic.
The floor is yours.
It was to give a very brief overview of the quantitative and qualitative exercise that we, as a number of the delivery partners that underpin and support the EEH, went through to come up with the list of connectivity studies that Abby touched on very briefly in her presentation, which is shown on one of the handouts on the right hand side, and really less about the process we went through, but the EEH's real push to develop this community within the Heartland, between both their constituent local authorities, the EEH technical team themselves, and obviously ourselves as delivery partners, be it consultants or contractor partners there. So yeah, it was the exercise that was undertaken was to develop a strategic program of connectivity studies for inclusion within the transport strategy that was published. This was a joint project between the EEH and Atkins and Jacobs, employing data and tools assembled by WSP and EEH authorities. And as I said very briefly there, the EEH have been very keen to draw upon skills and expertise in the delivery partner team and the joint expertise on offer. The work was broken down into 4 sections: an agree and assessment methodology, assessment of corridors, moderation of assessments, and a program and sequencing of corridors. It's been really, really keen to have a quantitative exercise and then a qualitative exercise with all partners being able to input into that process. First step was to develop this program of proposed connectivity studies. We undertook a sifting process of corridors against the 4 principles of the transport strategy. Employing that regional evidence base and outputs from opportunity mapping, they were used to inform the identification of indicators to assess these corridors against each principle and develop a high-level understanding of where the connectivity challenges and opportunities present themselves. This allowed us, as that joint technical team of Atkins and Jacobs, to develop a multi-criteria appraisal framework utilizing 17 indicators against the 4 principles of the transport strategy. Each of these principles are treated equally in the appraisal, and whilst the indicators have been given a weighting to reflect the relative importance of each indicator is seeking to achieve one of those principles. So the approach to the assessment of each corridor was as follows: confirm the geographic area of interest, focus on districts, drawing on the conclusions from the phase 1 assessment and further refinement of areas, collect data for the districts using the regional evidence base and build an understanding of the key issues based on this evidence, use objective criteria and scoring guide to define a proposed score for each indicator, supported by a narrative to explain the key issues and reason for the scoring, review the assessments to ensure internal consistency between the scores, e.g. between car mode split, traffic flow and CO2 per capita under the net zero principle. Internal review and challenge in each of the assessment teams, followed by moderation by the other team, and then moderation of corridor assessments and sequencing by the project team, including Atkins, Jacobs and EEH, and then finally overall scoring and prioritization sequencing of the corridors. So we were very keen to ensure we had a framework and a quantitative exercise, a really robust approach that we could then present to the EEH officers group for moderation and assessment. So following the completion of these assessments by each team, the assessments were moderated by the other team to ensure consistency and approach. A 2-step approach was taken to the assessments. The first step used the indicators to prioritize the corridors based on their performance against the 4 principles. From this, the strongest performing 13 of the 20 corridors were taken forward for the sequencing process. This sequencing process was a sort of final part of the technical assessment, was based upon trigger points that exist within the corridor, using existing evidence on housing growth and forecasted capacity constraints on the highway network. And I think it came back to a point earlier that where Abby received a question around where was that sort of local input able to be applied. And I think this was the point where we were able to apply some of that qualitative input around what could work and what couldn't work in certain corridors. I say this assessment was carried out for all corridors based upon the immediacy of the need rather than the greatest need. Further examination of the geography of the sequence corridors indicate there could be some scope for rationalisation of the studies in areas where the corridors overlap offer the potential to interact with corridors in the TFSE boundary to the south, or potentially the Midlands Connect to the north. We were really keen to make sure we rationalise these studies as far as possible. As I say, it wasn't solely a very dry quantitative assessment. We wanted to make sure we married the quantitative and qualitative assessment.
Matt, thank you very much. One of the things I was going to, you talk a lot about collaboration. You talk about the need to symbiotic relationships. It's hard, isn't it? We talked about it earlier, get cross-border cooperation and getting those kind of relationships to work. How are you doing it?
Absolutely. I think it's really testament to the approach in the EEH and really driving this delivery partner on this really collaborative forum that they've tried to drive since inception, really bringing, as I say, the individual authorities, bringing them forward into this forum, bringing each of their own, as ourselves in Atkins being a delivery partner with Swindon, be it Jacobs, WSP, be it a number of contractors in Ringway Jacobs, Skanska or Volker Highways, bringing these groups into this forum where we can say, look, we understand the whole should be greater than the sum of its parts. This is our aspiration as the EEH. These are some of the points and opinions of our constituent partners. How does that resonate with industry? What are you doing elsewhere, be it with other SNTBs or other authorities? How can we get to some of the outcomes that we're after by really harnessing this partnership approach between the public and private sector? So yeah, it's really testament to people like Naomi and Abby and Martin, really keen to make sure we do all leave our hats at the door, as we say, when we come together into these forums, and really make sure we are all driving in the same direction.
Great stuff. Thanks very much. Come back to you if we've got time at the end for some questions. Let me move rapidly on to Sian Thomas. Sian, talking about the collaborations, Sian is embedded in the Heartland as Network Improvement Manager with Ringway Jacobs. Sian, you're going to outline the implementation of active travel initiatives, particularly what you've done during the COVID-19 crisis. Sian.
Yeah. Hi. Hello. Thank you. First, I just want to say that it's amazing that we've all come together on this, and it feels like we're all reiterating the same. But it's fantastic to realise that we are all like-minded people, all trying to make the best of this opportunity that we've been given. And yeah, my involvement with active travel, working for Ringway Jacobs in Buckinghamshire with Buckinghamshire Council, has been different in that it's not different in the terms of the work that we do. It's just the pace that we've had to work at, and the just going that extra mile to work together to take or to try to take the general public with us. And it is, as we've all said, and I won't reiterate it too much, but it is important to say that this is the biggest in terms of changing the way that we travel and doing what we can during our watch, if you like, for to look after our planet and everything else. This is the greatest opportunity that we could have ever been landed with. We've literally been given the opportunity to leap forward. God knows how many years. I don't think anybody can put a time scale on it. And we need to seize that opportunity. And all the great things that we've been talking about, collaboration and at all different levels. I just want to give you a couple of examples of how we've been doing that at a very local level. And it sounds straightforward, but it's making a difference. We're working with Buckinghamshire Council, very good relationship with that client, and they have split up the activities, if you like, of delivering active travel to almost like a who does what best. And so whereas Ringway Jacobs will have taken on the design and implementation for the council, and the council have concentrated on the DFT interface and the political and client interface, working together so that there's no man marking, there's no grey areas, and there's no double handling. And I think that is a good example of collaboration and how to make light work of the challenge that we've got to deal with. Thank you.
Sian, thank you very much. I mean, to what extent do you think we heard a lot about it this afternoon? You mentioned it just now, this morning. Digital technologies and the ability to transform the sector and the Heartland's plans. I mean, to what extent do you think that's going to be a reality, Sian?
I'm by far not the expert in this field, but I do know that there is so many, you know, just listening to the roads that Dave Stewart just talked us through, you know, it is almost like already a huge leap into the future of this innovation that we're seeing. And I think if we can't use that opportunity that we've got and put our heads together and collaborate from top down and bottom up in the way that we've all been speaking about already, we never will get it right. And so I think as professionals, as human beings, this is our time. This is our time to make that difference. And I think we have to just pull out all the stops to do so. And I know there will be some negative thought that we might go back to the way things were, and that all this innovation, yeah, it's great, but it's not really going to make a massive difference. But I think we need to dispel that and make sure that we educate those that aren't, you know, lucky enough to sit on these forums and to hear from each other and to share these forums and to actually make it a reality.
Okay, let's take some. So we've got a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to romp through some of those. To Hannah and Ed, I think, and maybe to Matt. The strategy fails to, this is from Chris Todd. The strategy fails to show how it will meet net zero, as all scenarios show traffic increase when we need a minimum of 20% traffic reduction. How can we change this, as we don't have time to carry on as usual, even for a few years? Hannah.
Well, I take this back to using our carbon models to see where the emissions are and where we can make the most significant reductions, because I completely agree. If it's showing that there needs to be a decrease in traffic, then we should be directing the measures towards reducing emissions in those areas. But we can't do that unless we know exactly where those hotspots are. And to do that, we need to constantly be monitoring them.
Okay. I mean, following up there, there's a question that says, is the target of 2050 soon enough for climate change? Do we need 2030 or sooner? Do we need to be really accelerating these kind of changes?
As soon as possible, I'd say.
Ed?
Yeah.
Well, I think a number of the clients we work for as Skanska local authorities have a 2030 target, which is not that long away, 9.5 years away, and that includes the services that we provide them. So that is a massive challenge. And even if they're not successful by 2030, what we learn on the journey over the next 9 years will be hugely beneficial, and it will hopefully bring some of those that are at 2050 forward a bit. And I think we will only see things being brought forward. The pace of change in the industry is remarkable. You know, we were talking about things, say, 2-3 years ago as being 10-15 years away, and we see them today. And obviously the impact of coronavirus in terms of home working and changes in our view of the office and things like that, you know, it's just accelerated things. So I'm constantly surprised by that. So 2030, you know, it seemed pretty ambitious last year, but Nottingham, for example, is 2028, and they're well on the way. We're doing all sorts of exciting things. So okay. I think 2050 will start to look too far quite soon.
Question for Dave. A lot of people loved your presentation and your technology, Dave. Can it be used to access cleansing requirements, litter, below litter and leaf fall, is what Simon Bowers asks. Can the system be used to access cleaning below litter and leaf fall?
In theory, yes. It's not an area we've looked at yet, but as long as it's something that can be recognised by a camera or by an eye travelling along a network, then it can be used to collect data and prompt maintenance. So okay. An interesting one, which I'll note down straight away, and we'll add it to the ever-increasing list of things that it might be possible to use it for.
Slightly wider, and something I may be touching what I was talking to Sian about. What role do you see data playing in driving the future network management? That's from Richard Ward-Jones.
Like I said before, I mean, we've always had data. The problem has been we've had too much data and not enough time to use it, or not enough ways to use it effectively. If we can get data that is intelligent so that we can actually utilize it to prompt the right priorities in the right places at the right times, which is what this system helps us to do, then we'll be able to step forward. Until we get to that position and we're still crunching a load of data every year and then eventually getting out on site to react to that data, then we'll be slow in moving forward.
Matt, if you're still there, maybe Sian, you can comment as well. Victoria Josepha says, we need more car disincentives like workplace parking level to support public transport now more than ever. Is this something which in your connectivity studies you've looked at, Matt?
Yeah, I think Abby made the point earlier. It's certainly looking at that holistic transport system. And certainly, I think as the point's been made, it might be a bit of an oxymoron, but how can we harness the benefits of coronavirus? Those more local trips, there's certainly a lot more conversations now around 15, or depending on where you're reading, 15 or 20-minute neighborhoods. People are working a lot more locally. There is an opportunity to lock in, as I say, some of these benefits to drive forward some of our carbon commitments, or looking at a totally different so yeah, I think it's always I'm always slightly hesitant to always look at to look at sticks over carrot. But as I say, we seem to have a different palette of opportunities or a different palette of measures we can employ. So I think, yeah, we certainly can look, but I think, as I say, what's happened over the last 6 months, rather than it be more about, to put it bluntly, bashing motorists, I think it's about harnessing some of these different mode choices, or basically where people are now looking to live, work and spend their money. It's harnessing some of those benefits, as I say, something as terrible as coronavirus has brought.
Well, Sian, another thing which is we've seen, of course, is more home deliveries and more people shopping at home and rather than going to the shop. So there's a question here from Alex Probert: are logistics really paying their fair share for the environmental damage? Would bigger taxes on logistics make a difference? What's your view on that? Our change post-COVID to home delivery?
I think, well, we're all seeing it. I see it in and out the close that I live in, and I think people I speak to have said that it's not that they're scared of going to the shops anymore. It's not that they're scared of going out and staying safe. It's just because they found it was a change that they found was useful and it worked for them, so they might stay with it. I don't think we'll know the answer to that, but I think putting disincentives on that would be wrong, because at the same time we're trying to balance the economy and trying to keep all these businesses going. It would be wrong to try and make it difficult for those businesses to keep operating. But I think one of the things we can do is and I know others have already mentioned it lots, is to create more incentives for people to choose the bike or your feet over the car, and to put that infrastructure and facilities in place. And one last thing on it is to take the car drivers with us, because not everybody is, I don't think we're quite yet there in educating, I hate using that word, but to educating those people that aren't involved in the sectors that we work in, and to explain to them what we're trying to do for the greater good. And I think if they understood the bigger picture of why we're trying to disadvantage the car user, they might be a bit more lenient towards us, and they might be more understanding of the measures we're trying to introduce.
Sian, thank you very much. We're bang out of time, so I'm going to draw a conclusion to this innovation section. Huge amount of opportunity there going for the industry if we can really work together to collaborate to embrace the kind of technologies Dave showed us, that Ed explained and Hannah described, etc. So thank you very much for my panel. To Matt, you couldn't see, but you heard. Sian, Ed, Hannah and Dave for joining us there. We are going to move rapidly into our final session now. And by the way, there's, I'm sure, lots of information that you can get. There's a lot of people wanting more information about Dave's technology, etc. So get a hold of him via the conference, and I'm sure that we'll be able to